For many of us, our daily routines probably aren't something we sit around and think about very often. After all, they're routines. We do them every day. In fact, the word routine is often closely associated with monotony, repetition, boredom. These all sound like negative things, but in many ways, our routines also keep us grounded. They anchor us to the world around us, and they can be an immense source of comfort. Or at least, they should be. Today's story is all about how this thing that is normally one of the most predictable, reliable parts of our lives can go horribly wrong. It will definitely have you looking over your shoulder, especially because in this case, the consequences were truly horrifying. In late spring of 2018, Robert Sharp was beginning a new chapter of his life. At the age of 76, he found himself living on his own for the first time in decades. His wife of more than 50 years, Maria, had recently passed away following a long battle with colon cancer. According to those that knew them, Robert and Maria were true soulmates and had known that they were a perfect match for each other almost from the moment they had met. Robert's sister Helen had been in a French class with Maria while they were both university students and had insisted on introducing them. Her instincts about their compatibility had quickly proven to be correct. After getting married, Robert and Maria had gone on to build a wonderful life together. They had one son, David, and had settled in the city of Ann Arbor, Michigan, where they both went on to have incredibly interesting stories and careers. Maria was born in the city of Zagreb, Croatia in 1941. At the time, Croatia was part of Yugoslavia, and only months earlier the nation had been invaded by the Axis powers during World War II. Like many people, Maria's family had gone through absolute hell during this time, but had eventually made it to the United States, where they built a new life starting with almost nothing. Maria was an excellent student growing up, graduating as valedictorian from her class in university. She taught French in public schools for a couple of years, but would have many other successful careers throughout her life. She opened a children's clothing store, worked as a real estate agent, and ended up teaching real estate law to others who were preparing for their licensing exams. Even after retiring, Maria kept busy. She was passionate about animals and was single-handedly responsible for raising thousands of dollars for her local humane society that went to the vaccination, spaying, and neutering of stray cats. She also wrote a book about her life that was published in 2017 about the experiences of her and her family. It was titled Letter to My Grandchildren, Memoir of a Croatian Immigrant. Robert, on the other hand, spent his life in academia. From the time he was a boy, he had this incredible curiosity about the world. He was extremely intelligent and always gravitated towards learning and education. He skipped several grades in school before attending Case Western Reserve University in Ohio, where he obtained his PhD while studying chemistry. After meeting Maria, Robert became a postdoctoral fellow at Oxford University in England. The pair of them lived there together for 2 years before Robert got an offer to join the faculty at the University of Michigan. Now, as you might imagine, Robert was a gifted researcher. Some of his work even went on to have applications in MRI and radiological technology. However, it turned out that he was even better suited to being a teacher. He ultimately became a professor of chemistry at the university, where he was very well known and liked by students. Part of the reason that Robert was such a great and natural teacher was that never-ending thirst for learning that he had. Despite all of his degrees and specializations, he never limited himself to science. He loved art, culture, philosophy, and history, and he had a really genuine way of relating to people. No matter how much he loved his job, though, Robert loved his family more, and so in May of 2008, he decided it was finally time to retire, in large part so he could spend more time with Maria. For the next 10 years, that's exactly what he did. From the outside looking in, this period of time probably would have looked a lot less exciting compared to the lives that Robert and Maria had been living so far, but that didn't concern them at all. They were happy. All that mattered was that they had each other. Almost every day, Robert and Maria would head down to their local Wendy's. The restaurant was located just over half a mile from where they lived in a quiet townhouse condo community on Alpine Drive. Once there, they would order lunch and sit together. If the weather was nice, they'd usually take a spot on one of the stone benches in the little seating area outside. Robert would bring his laptop and would spend time browsing articles and reading the paper, while Maria would always make sure to bring a little something to feed the stray cats in the area. The couple continued this for as long as they could, even after Maria got sick. When she was too weak to do anything else, Robert would read to her for hours every night in their bedroom. On April 20th, 2018, Maria finally lost her battle with cancer. As you might imagine, Robert, David, and the rest of the family were devastated. However, what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly have known, is that tragedy would strike them again less than 2 months later. Only this time, it wouldn't be due to any kind of illness. Instead, they would be the victims of something far more sinister. In the weeks after Maria's death, Robert began the slow process of getting his life back in order. If you've ever dealt with a death in your family, you'll know that even when something like this is expected, there's usually a ton of loose ends to tie up. And that's after the funeral and everything has all been dealt with. In this case, Robert was starting to go through his house and trying to get things organized. Figure out what he was going to keep, what he needed to get rid of, who in the family might want certain possessions that belonged to Maria, stuff like that. At the same time, Robert continued his daily trips to Wendy's. Part of the reason was that it was a way for him to feel close to his wife. But on top of this, it also added a bit of consistency and normalcy to what was otherwise a difficult time. Just like always, Robert would head to the restaurant around lunchtime, always making sure to take his computer bag, which was packed with his laptop and everything else that he needed. When he got there, he'd set up his little station and spend the afternoon reading and browsing around on the internet. By this point, Robert barely even had to say anything when he walked up to the register anymore. He'd been going to the restaurant for so many years that pretty much everyone knew him there and were familiar with his orders. Obviously, because Robert was in there so often, several of the staff members at the Wendy's knew that his wife had passed away. They offered their condolences and tried their best to sort of check in on him while he was there. It was partly for this reason that a number of them felt terrible when one day that May, Robert's laptop was stolen while he was at the restaurant. He had gone to quickly use the bathroom, and when he came back, the computer was gone. A bunch of employees tried to help Robert look for the device and even offered to check the security cameras. But unfortunately, the area of the dining room he was sitting in didn't have great camera coverage. Of course, this was annoying, but Robert wasn't overly bothered by it. He knew he had left his computer out in the open and had kind of been planning to get a new one anyway. He actually used the whole thing as an excuse to splurge a bit and buy a MacBook. The new laptop quickly came in handy because Robert was starting to plan a vacation for him and the rest of his family. The computer's FaceTime app was an easy way for him to jump on calls with David and his wife, who lived in New York. Over the next couple of weeks, they spent hours talking about this cruise they were all going to take together with Robert's grandkids. Unfortunately, it seemed like Robert just couldn't catch a break. On June 6th, his string of bad luck continued when he got home from his usual Wendy's trip to find that his townhouse had been broken into.
Boston, Massachusetts, Stargate Television.
Hello, I'd like to report a crime, a break-in.
Okay. Is it happening now, or did it?
No, it happened this afternoon.
Okay, just found it?
Yes, I just got home. I left this afternoon about 1:30, and then by the time I got home, I noticed that one of my drawers in which I keep keys and things had been rummaged through. And
Did you find any obvious points of entry?
yes, my back door.
Okay, how'd they get in?
Well, I thought that my back door was locked, but when I got there and tried it, it was not locked.
No, if you don't know for sure that nobody's still inside, I'm going to ask you.
Okay, I'll do that, yes.
As you just heard, Robert called 911 after discovering that someone had gone into his home through the unlocked back entrance. Once inside, they had rummaged through a set of cupboards and drawers right by the doorway. They had stolen a set of spare keys, which included a fob for his car, as well as several electronics. When police arrived at the scene to investigate, body cam footage was taken of the interaction between Robert and the officers. I have to say, watching this, I feel like you really get a sense of Robert's personality, his warmth and genuineness, and also the way that he's so obviously a teacher. Like, if my house was just ransacked, I'd be a mess. But in part of the footage, Robert stops to explain what a Roku streaming device is to one of the officers.
You called us, and when you came up, you noticed the door was not locked. You went inside, and then what did you notice? You can go ahead and show me where.
Yeah, it was open, and so then right inside that cupboard, I have a drawer where I normally put my car keys, I put my billfold and that kind of thing in. I went inside the drawer where I do that, and it had obviously been rummaged through. Everything was in a different position and messed around.
Can you show me where that drawer is at?
Yeah. This is where my spare keys would hang, and they're gone.
Okay.
I had one of those little sticks. And that I don't see.
And what is that?
Oh, it's to control your internet. It's a remote like this, but it operates a Roku unit. And basically, the Roku is on. The Roku unit is on.
I don't know what a Roku unit is.
Okay, a Roku unit is something where you can get all of your television from the internet. You don't have to buy cable. They stole the Roku unit.
What was even more interesting than the items the culprit had taken, though, was what they had apparently chosen to leave behind. A lot of valuables had been left untouched inside the residence, including credit cards, checks, and a lot of financial documents that were out in the open.
My Bose radio is here.
DVD player.
This is a DVD thing, and this is a DVD player. They're here.
Now, another thing that was strange is in here, I shouldn't leave these open, but by God I did. Credit cards, all kinds of things in there. None of it's missing as far as I can tell. It's all still there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's strange.
Police documented everything that had been taken and filed the report, but there wasn't much more they could do in that moment. They told Robert to remember to lock his doors and said that they would be in contact as the investigation into the break-in continued. Sadly, before really any progress could be made, something else happened. Something that would cause this whole situation to take on haunting new significance. On the night of June 11th, 2018, so 5 days after Robert reported that break-in at his townhouse, police received a deeply unsettling 911 call from a woman. That woman, who we're going to call Kathy for the sake of making it easier to tell the story, said that she was worried about one of her elderly neighbors. This man, who Kathy normally saw pretty much every day, suddenly wasn't out and about like usual. When she tried to phone him, her calls weren't answered, and strangely, the automated voice on his home phone line told her that no voicemail had been set up. Finally, she had headed over to the man's townhouse, where she had made another disturbing discovery. His newspaper, which he read religiously every day, was still sitting on the porch. It didn't look like anyone was home, yet the front door to the house was ever so slightly cracked open. That address belonged to Robert Sharp.
Hello, where's your emergency? I'm at my friend's house. I checked in on him earlier today, did not find him around, and then to this evening, I called his home phone and said the voicemail wasn't set up, but now there's no voicemail set up.
You want to call into the house and check on it? And like check the
Yeah.
the person? Okay, what's his name?
His name is Robert,
How old is he?
76. So I was leaving the house, and as I'm driving past, I noticed that the paper was still on the front porch, and the door is a little bit open, so I'm not going in the house.
Ann Arbor police immediately headed over to Robert's townhouse to conduct a welfare check. When they arrived, a couple of the officers went in through the open front door. Now, Robert's home had one of those kind of classic townhouse layouts, where you go in and you're hit with stairs in every direction. One of these sets of stairs went up to another main part of the house. The other direction you could go in quickly took you to a second staircase that led down into the basement. And as soon as police started walking in this latter direction, they could tell that something was seriously wrong. There was a very strong smell of smoke, and on the basement staircase itself, the whole area looked like it was covered in soot. The fire department was called in to make sure that it was safe for police to proceed. When they arrived at the scene, officers showed them what they had found, but they also wanted to see if they could assess what was going on down there from a different angle. As a result, they decided to head around the back and look through this small basement window. When one of the firefighters peered through the glass, what he saw made his blood run cold.
You can tell, this carpet on the stairs there. So you can see to the left there, that's all set across this here. But
And you said there's no basement windows, right?
they're in the back, they are, but they're like the recessed ones are down below. They're like in a little well down there. And then the basement window's right in front of you there, right there.
Probably bust that bolt right up. Alright.
Good.
There's a hand. I can see a hand, fellas.
When police and firefighters headed down into the basement, their worst fears were confirmed. That hand that they had spotted from the window belonged to Robert Sharp. The scene was absolutely horrendous. An autopsy would later reveal that Robert had suffered at least 28 knife wounds. 11 of these were stab wounds, while the remaining were deep cuts and slashes. Most of the injuries were to the 76-year-old's head, neck, and upper body, with the medical examiner determining that at least 4 of the stab wounds individually would have been fatal. Just as disturbing as the murder itself was how the person responsible had tried to cover up what had happened. Robert's body was under a large pile of debris that had been set on fire. This pile consisted of clothing, newspapers, a mirror, and other random items. It seemed that the killer had grabbed whatever they could find, apparently hoping that the burn pile would destroy all of the evidence. This had only been partially successful. While the fire had burned hot enough to literally sever Robert's body in half and disintegrate some of his bones, it had failed to spread to the rest of the house. By the time police arrived, what they had smelled were the smoldering remnants of the blaze. Because of this, as well as the fact that the basement wasn't hot, firefighters told officers at the scene that they believed the fire had been set at least a few hours ago, possibly even the day before. This lined up with what they had already been told by Kathy, who explained during her 911 call that she hadn't seen Robert at all that day. This was further backed up by evidence that police found in the kitchen. Like the basement, all of the blood evidence in the kitchen was dry and looked like it had been for some time. With this, investigators concluded that Robert had probably been killed sometime the night before he was found, on June 10th. Based on the amount of blood, it was also clear that the kitchen is where the actual murder had taken place. There was blood everywhere, including marks showing how Robert had likely been dragged down the stairs after he was dead. A thorough search of the residence revealed that several items were missing. This included Robert's brand new Apple laptop. A credit card belonging to the 76-year-old was also found in the pile of debris close to his body. Understandably, these details led authorities to believe that Robert's murder was some kind of home invasion/robbery gone wrong. The question now was, who could be responsible for such an awful crime? As it turned out, the case wouldn't actually take very long to solve. However, the truth behind what had happened was something no one was prepared for. While the forensics team continued processing the crime scene, Detectives with the Ann Arbor Police Department turned their attention to figuring out what had actually happened to Robert Sharp. Right off the bat, there were two people of interest that they needed to explore. The first was Kathy, since she was the one that had alerted authorities to the whole situation. Very quickly, though, Kathy was ruled out as a suspect. She was able to account for her whereabouts both that day and the night before, when investigators believed the murder had actually occurred. Kathy was very emotional when detectives told her what was going on. It turned out that she had known Robert and Maria for about 25 years and was quite friendly with both of them. When asked, she said she couldn't think of anyone that would do something like this. Robert was just a kind old man who had never bothered anybody.
So just, when was the last time you talked to him?
I talked to him Thursday. He doesn't have any family here. He doesn't have a whole lot of friends. He's a retired professor, and so I just would come and, he was trying to get the house organized and cleaned up because his wife just passed away.
The second suspect that detectives spoke with was another neighbor of Robert's. She was questioned after police found a note in Robert's backyard that had been written by her. The message itself was pretty mundane. It was about borrowing a wheelbarrow. But what caught the attention of police was how it ended. Written at the bottom were the words, "See you tonight." Understandably, this caught the attention of police when they saw it. But when detectives followed up, the woman also had a solid alibi. She really was just borrowing a wheelbarrow. Though both of these early leads were a bust, it wasn't long before investigators were alerted to something a lot more substantial. They were informed that two of their fellow officers had come to Robert's house just a few nights earlier to investigate a break-in. Upon hearing this, detectives began poring over that body cam footage that I showed you a little earlier. When they did, they were convinced that this was no coincidence. Whoever was responsible for the break-in almost certainly had something to do with Robert's murder. The body cam footage was very helpful because it almost served as a sort of time capsule of what the crime scene had looked like right before the murder. With it, investigators were able to confirm some of the things that had been stolen from Robert's home. Things like his new laptop, which had definitely been there following that initial break-in, but were now missing. They also theorized that the culprit had used Robert's front door this time because they had his spare keys and would have been able to walk right in. As you might imagine, watching the body cam footage back with this new context was also quite haunting. It was almost like that part of a horror movie where you can see the awful thing that's about to happen, but no matter how much you scream and yell at the screen, there's just no way to change anything. Except this was even worse. I'm sure there must have been some part of the detectives that wondered, if whether things had been handled differently, Robert would still be alive. Sadly, it was too late for that now. However, it wasn't too late to find and catch the person who had done this. Because of how violent this crime was, and because of the way there had been an attempt to cover it up, detectives suspected that they were dealing with an experienced perpetrator. As a result, they started looking around for different offenders in the area whose histories indicated that they might be capable of committing a crime of this nature. It turned out that there was one man who fit this criteria disturbingly well. His name was Isom Hamilton. Isom was a 28-year-old from the neighboring city of Ypsilanti. At the time, he was on parole, having only recently been released from prison the previous year. The crime that had put him there was far less violent than the one authorities were now investigating. All the same, it was impossible to miss the similarities. Isom had been arrested for a home invasion in late 2012. Not only had he primarily stolen electronics during that incident, but he had also broken in while the victim was home. When he was caught, he threatened the male homeowner, telling him he'd kill him if he didn't get out of the way. Oh yeah, and that victim? He was also a professor, one who taught at Eastern Michigan University. Needless to say, when detectives found all of this out, they were extremely suspicious. On a hunch, they started looking for surveillance footage taken around the time of the murder. Specifically, they focused on businesses that were along the route that Isom would have taken if he traveled between where he was living in Ypsilanti and where Robert Sharp lived in Ann Arbor. What they found was truly stunning. Approximately 3 miles from Robert's townhouse complex, there was a Speedway gas station and convenience store. Sure enough, when investigators looked at the business's video, it revealed that Isom had been in there twice within the time frame that they were interested in. The first visit wasn't all that remarkable. It happened on the evening of June 10th and showed Isom simply coming in to buy a drink. However, several hours later, around 2 in the morning, Isom had returned to the store. This time, he had a second bag in addition to his backpack. The bag was slung around his neck, and he hadn't been carrying it before. The thing was a dead ringer for the black computer bag that was among the many items that were missing from Robert Sharp's home. You know, the one that he also would have kept his brand new laptop in. In the footage, Isom could be seen walking over to a coffee machine area in the convenience store, where he actually opened up the bag. Detectives were convinced that as he was rummaging through its contents, they could see Roku devices near the top. As if that wasn't enough, there also appeared to be dark stains near the bottom of the 28-year-old's jeans. Investigators wondered if this might be blood. At this point, Isom Hamilton was thoroughly at the top of the list of suspects in the case. But detectives still wanted to get more before making any kind of arrest. So they went to the one person they thought might be able to provide them with the information they needed: Isom's grandmother. It ended up being a crucial decision. Isom was living with his grandmother at the time, and it turned out that she was more than willing to talk to police. You see, she had some suspicions of her own about her grandson's recent strange behavior. During an interview, the elderly woman stated that over the past couple of weeks, so basically the time since the murder, she had suddenly started to notice that Isom had a lot of nice things. Things she knew he couldn't afford with the kinds of jobs that he had been working. Among those items were 2 in particular that jumped out: an Apple laptop and a Roku streaming box.
Your grandson, Isom, has been staying with you since about when you told me that? About the end of February? Okay. Ted, so you started seeing some things that weren't adding up.
Yeah.
Tell me about that again. What was going on?
When he was still working, some of the items I thought, I said, well, maybe he might have bought a computer, but I wasn't sure. But I know those apples are quite expensive, and I know he wasn't making enough money to buy an apple.
And so you ask him about it, and he tells you what?
Well, he told me a guy had offered to sell it to him. He wanted to sell it to him. I'm like,
So that didn't make sense to you either, really, then, right? And how about items like for the TV? We talked about this Roku stuff.
yeah.
So tell me about that.
And it was 3 boxes.
So you saw 3 Roku boxes?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
He stole from me once. He got caught breaking in somebody's house.
He stole from you too?
Yes.
The expensive electronics weren't the only things that the woman felt her grandson didn't have a good explanation for, though. She said that right before she started seeing all these new items, Isom had come home late one morning. When he did, she had seen blood all over the bottoms of his jeans. He claimed that he had been in a fight, but the grandmother felt that there was more to the story.
As far as the regular clothes go, was there a time that you saw him come home and he had some stain or some kind of stuff on his pants that caught your attention?
Yeah, that one time he came home with some blue cheeks. Well, it was late at night and he came in and it looked like he was kind of roughed up, and I'm like, well, what happened to you? Well, I got to go couple with somebody, and I didn't get hurt. I said, where did blood come from? It came from the other person. And he told me, the other day, I saw a scratch on his leg. I said, look, why your leg is bleeding? He scratched and stuff. But it did look like he had my right scratch stuff out. That the blue jeans he was wearing, they were bloody.
They were bloody?
Yeah.
Where did you see the blood on the blue jeans? Down in there, okay. Mostly on the, like, from the knee down, would you say? Like below the knee?
Yeah. I'd say that might have been maybe a couple of weeks ago.
Okay. Blood on the blue jeans was maybe a couple weeks ago?
I can't say for sure, but it wasn't this week.
You can't say exactly, but
No,
you think maybe 2 weeks ago?
Yeah.
Following this interview, authorities began conducting surveillance on Isom Hamilton. During this time, they were able to establish that he frequently traveled into Ann Arbor and hung around in various spots in the city. They also conducted a search of his grandmother's house, where they were able to recover the clothing he had been wearing in the gas station surveillance footage. Unfortunately, the clothing had since been thoroughly washed, so there was no DNA on it, though there were still stains on them that appeared to have come from blood. While this was a setback, in the end, it didn't affect the case much. Once detectives were on Isom's trail, they were able to find plenty of other evidence. For starters, cell data showed that he had been near Robert Sharp's house for several hours between the night of June 10th and June 11th. Remember that credit card that had been found in the basement? Well, police were able to find a trail of failed attempted financial transactions from it around that same time. Someone had been trying to send $2,000 repeatedly from the card to a Square account. That account belonged to Isom Hamilton. As if this wasn't enough, when authorities arrested Isom on June 27th, he was in possession of a bunch of the stuff that had been stolen from Robert Sharp's house. This included the Roku devices and both of Robert's laptops. Yeah, you heard that right. I said both. You're probably wondering how that can be the case. And that's because there's something I haven't told you yet. You see, before detectives started seriously digging into Isom as a suspect, there was another reason that he was on their radar in relation to this case. Until very recently, he had worked at that Wendy's restaurant that Robert went to every day. Police were right about the initial break-in at Robert's house and his murder being connected. But what they didn't know was that this other misfortune Robert had dealt with was also part of this whole thing. None of it had been random. As far as we can tell, Robert and Isom never really interacted personally. But as I mentioned earlier, Robert was in the restaurant so frequently that a bunch of the other staff members knew him decently well. Because of this, it would have been very easy for Isom to gather information about him from his coworkers. He would have known that Robert was retired, that he lived alone, and that he was very vulnerable. He also would have had a good idea of his daily schedule, and it would have been incredibly easy to follow him home. From all of the available court documents and reporting on the case, it appears that Isom watched Robert at least over a period of weeks, possibly over a period of months. He then began a series of escalating crimes against him. He began by opportunistically stealing his laptop from the Wendy's dining room. A few weeks later, he broke into Robert's townhouse and stole a few more things. Finally, he had broken in again on the fateful night of June 10th. It's unclear if Isom planned to kill Robert from the start. Based on what police have said, it seems that Robert was killed with one of his own knives, so it appears he didn't bring a weapon to the crime scene. At the same time, though, because Isom knew Robert's schedule, it begs the question, why would he have broken in when he knew he was probably going to be there? Unfortunately, we just don't know. Following his arrest, Isom refused to speak with police or offer any kind of explanation for what he had done. Instead, he continued to maintain his innocence and opted for a bench trial the following year. During that trial, even more damning evidence came out. This included additional surveillance footage of Isom at a local Apple store the day after the murder, where he had employees help him to wipe a laptop. Police were able to prove that this was Robert's computer because it had the exact same serial number as the one that he had recently purchased. For his part, Isom and his defense team argued that possession of stolen property didn't mean he was a killer, and that the entire case against him was based on circumstantial evidence. Technically, this is true, though the sheer amount of evidence was quite convincing and proved to be overwhelming. Almost a year to the day that Robert Sharp was killed, Isom Hamilton was found guilty of multiple crimes, including felony murder, first-degree arson, and armed robbery. He was sentenced to life in prison, and at the time of this recording, remains incarcerated at Michigan's G. Robert Cotton Correctional Facility. As I've mentioned several times previously on this channel, the hardest stories we cover are the ones where there's lots of information available about the victims. You almost feel like you get to know them by the end of doing all this research, and that was certainly the case for me with Robert Sharp. He was such a bright light, and it truly seems like he endeared himself to almost everyone he came across. Like I said before, I was completely struck by that body cam footage following the first break-in. Here's this guy who's just experienced a string of tragedies, and he's just so upbeat and friendly with the officers. I found this clip particularly heartbreaking.
So did you go to U of M as well then?
No.
Did you? No, you didn't?
No, I went to Oxford University and the United Kingdom.
See what I mean? So you are a very smart guy.
Oh dear, I don't know. I've certainly been around some smart people in my time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Robert Sharp may have been 76 years old, but I think it's clear that he probably should have had many more years ahead of him. He was in good health, and that time was callously stolen from both him and his loved ones. I feel terrible in particular for David Sharp, who lost both his parents in such a short period of time. I can't even begin to imagine what that must have been like. Though Robert Sharp will undoubtedly be remembered for his scholarly achievements, I think there's also something to be said for the fact that a lot of the impact he had on the world had nothing to do with science or academics. He was curious, open-minded, and he cared about people. Sometimes it's the simplest things that are worth celebrating. In this same spirit, in the aftermath of Robert's death, a memorial to him and Maria was set up. 2 plaques were placed in their honor at the Wendy's, where they spent so many happy and peaceful moments together. Before we wrap up, we'd like to take a second to give a huge shout out to everyone who has made it this far into the video. Seriously, thank you so much for watching. If you found today's upload interesting and informative, we'd be honored if you'd consider liking and subscribing, as well as hitting the notification bell and selecting all notifications to stay up to date with our latest releases. If you're looking for additional ways to help support the channel, we'd love to have you join us over on Patreon. Patrons get ad-free and early access to all of our content, as well as 4 additional stories per week for each of our Crimes of the Week and Crimes of the Week International videos. You can learn more at patreon.com/crimezone, where you'll also find some of the fine folks whose names are currently on screen. All that being said, we understand that not everyone has the means to support financially, and that's totally okay. We appreciate every like, sub, share, and comment that you send our way. Once again, thanks so much everyone, and take care.